turn green when it's... No, they're all on. They're all on. Okay. That's all right. So red on ours, green on yours. Okay.
All right. So you're in brake side. When they're on brake, this is return. Okay. Put your headphones on. So when you come to a brake.
Technology and extended hours is a perfect fit for your busy life. Stop it.
Exhibit again.
Rare prehistoric artifacts of Dodge County.
Rare prehistoric artifacts of Dodge County. Oh yeah, right. We can't not have these.
Man, I feel like I'm on like Sports Center now or something.
There you go. Betcha. That's a different wing of Good Karma.
Yeah, right in between you guys. That's not the stepchild thing.
Right.
That's the money ring. So are you gonna move that way slowly? Because right now I'm zoomed down on the exhibit in the back, right? You gotta go that way.
I gotta go this way? Okay.
So when it goes live, it's looking at an exhibit piece right now.
Oh, cool.
We need to
Awesome.
hold these fairly close to our mouth.
Yeah, these, Jeff, these are like a couple inches away, right? You don't want to be too far. You want to be right up on it?
Here. Okay.
Judging at 1 at Urgo Bank. Children's costume contest at 1:30 at State Street Salon. Pumpkin
Who can only read our lips.
95X. Trunk or treat from 4 to 6 at St. John's Lutheran Church and citywide trick-or-treating also from 4 to 6. Face painting, bake sale, broad fry, tons of treats, fun and games. Come enjoy downtown Fox Lake.
Check out the latest information on station contests at dailydodge.com. Brought to you by Hometown Glass and Improvement.
Here's a look at your weatherology forecast. We'll see mostly sunny skies here this afternoon, high in the upper 50s. Winds out of the south increased around 10 to 15 miles per hour. Then for tonight, mostly clear skies, a low near 45. By Saturday, a chance for some rain showers here late, increasing clouds, a high of 57 degrees. Then by Sunday, mostly sunny sky conditions, we'll see high of 62. I'm meteorologist Jennifer Wojcicki on your hometown station AM 1430 WBEV. Currently, it's 52.
1236 from AM 1430 WBEV, streaming online at dailydodge.com. Make that 1237. And with today's community comment, here's your host, Craig Warmbold.
Well, thank you very much, Cale. And we are on the road with Community Comment today, broadcasting live from the beautiful Dodge County Historical Society Museum in downtown Beaver Dam. Our guests here today are with the Dodge County Historical Society. We've got the curator of the Historical Society, Kurt Sampson. Kurt, it's great seeing you again today.
You too.
And we've got the president of the board of directors for the Dodge County Historical Society, Pat Lutz. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pat.
Great to be here, and welcome to the former Williams Free Library, and it's been the Dodge County Historical Society since 1984.
The former Williams Free Library. Now, this is a bit of there's quite a history we're talking about an exhibit today, but this building itself has quite a history.
Right, we could do a whole program just on the building itself.
Well, if you briefly could kind of maybe set the stage for us with the building. If I'm not mistaken, there was a first in America that took place in this building.
Right, we were one of the very first free libraries, and a free library meant that you could just come into the library and wander around. In most libraries at the time, you had to go to a front desk, they called it a circulation desk, and ask for a particular book or explain what you were looking for, and they would bring you the reference materials. But you weren't free to wander around and pick it out yourself.
And this is the first place in America where you were able to do that, was right here in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin.
Yeah, we have a very special honor. Wow. And Mr. Williams, who it was named after, he was a local banker and a philanthropist as well. He donated the initial money, and this was really one of the largest public buildings in south central Wisconsin at the time. Was built and finished in 1890.
Yeah, and we're broadcasting live today, video streaming as well. If you go to the video tab at dailydodge.com, you'll be able to watch today's program, and it is something you may want to watch because there's a lot of cool stuff here in this century-old building. Exactly how old is the building?
Again, it was built in 1890.
Well, I can't do math, Pat. You have to do it. So that's 130 years old.
Yeah, we've been here for a while, right?
Wow. And this is a three-story
three-story building. Initially, it was just this main floor was the library, and it wasn't until the 1950s where they created the children's library upstairs. And then with different remodelings over the years, we also had the Dodge County Lending Library, which was in the basement. And then in the 1950s, they also created a balcony on the first level.
Okay, so we're going to be on the first floor today looking at the the newest exhibit. But if Ninja could pan around here, there's many exhibits that are in here right now. Can you just maybe give a brief
Sure,
kind of
sure,
run through of
absolutely.
some of the exhibits that folks, if they were to come in today or any time that the museum's open, they'd be able to see?
Sure, be glad to do that. We have on the first floor, we have this area where we're standing right now, which is ever changing. So we have sometimes exhibits that come from outside of the museum, but we're always changing this area. So that's why we're so excited to have this museum that Kurt's put together with some help, and he'll explain who assisted him with it. Also, we have our Wall of Fame, where we have some pretty famous people who came from Beaver Dam and went off to do some wonderful things all around the world.
No, that's back over there. If
Yes,
I'm not,
right.
if
We'll
I'm
be
not
checking
mistaken.
that out later if we have time.
Who are
And-
some of the people on that?
Well, Fred
Wall of Fame?
McMurray, who many people know from movies and television, and someone that many people aren't aware of, but we have one of our murals in town, and his name is Ray Galloon.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he was a famous science fiction writer that many science fiction writers today look back upon and say, boy, this guy, he's the guy who came up with some of the ideas that we're still hearing about today.
Well, fantastic. And I think there's even a Matty Horn exhibit. Is that
Matty
still
Horn
back
was
over
a
there?
famous
Olympian?
Olympian ice skater. We have 3 Olympians from Beaver Dam, and we can talk about those later as well.
Certainly. And then the amount of space that you dedicate to our veterans, our local veterans here, is
Yes,
also quite
right.
exceptional.
We have a wonderful exhibit upstairs that our late Bob Frankenstein, who was a board member, put together and did pretty much the whole exhibit himself, and really dedicated his life to that. And it is fantastic. And we also have what we call Old Beaver Dam upstairs with a number of exhibits dealing with artifacts that people use, things that they use in everyday life. And then the basement is the manufacturing in Beaver Dam. And it honors manufacturing, but also it explains some of the interesting products that were made in Beaver Dam, from the aluminum Christmas tree to the Beaver Dam tip-up and all kinds of interesting products.
A lot of those Monarch ovens are still firing up today, aren't they?
Still being
May
used
not be
all
produced.
the way, all around the United States and even around the world.
But we are here today specifically talking about the newest exhibit at the Dodge County Historical Society, and that is the Rare Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County exhibit. And this is a special passion of yours, Kurt.
Absolutely. Yeah, this exhibit is something I've been thinking about doing for several years now. And basically what it is a collection of some of the rarest types of prehistoric artifacts from Dodge County that date back nearly 12,000 years in the county.
Right, this was a big hotbed for people settling in. Native Americans were all around here.
Absolutely. Native American people have been living in Dodge County, like I said, for nearly 12,000 years, and they left a lot of material evidence behind of those occupations at various times during prehistory. And when some of the earliest European settlers showed up in Beaver Dam, people like Thomas Mackey and the Browers, they were coming in contact with Native American people that were still here. And these people are still here with us today. Sometimes people think, oh, the Native Americans aren't here anymore, but they're still among us today and still living even in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. And this area was heavily occupied in the early historic period, in the early 1800s, by Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk people in particular, Menominee, and even some Fox.
Wow. And
Yeah.
How did the pieces in this exhibit come together? Where'd they come from?
Well, many of the pieces that are in the exhibit actually came from our existing collection that we had here. A lot of the bulk of the existing collection came from the efforts of a man named William Schneider, who lived in Beaver Dam from the 1870s up until the early 1830s. And William Schneider was kind of an interesting character. He did a lot of different things over the course of his life. He worked at Monarch Corporation as a supervisor at one time. He actually owned a bicycle repair shop in town here, right on the main drag here. And as a youth and even into his adult years, he was going around the county and collecting prehistoric artifacts all over the county, but more specifically around Beaver Dam and the Fox Lake area. And unfortunately, Will Schneider was actually killed in a car accident when he was 64 years old, up on 151 over here, as going up towards Waupun. So unfortunately, yeah, his life was kind of cut short, but he was kind of also a jack of all trades, kind of like Increase Lapham, who we'll talk a little bit about later. Schneider collected not only prehistoric artifacts, but he collected a lot of plants and insects and what else did he collect?
Yeah, he was quite a collector. In fact, beetles and different insects. His collections were very, very big, and they're at a number of universities in Wisconsin that he donated some of his collections.
Wow.
So one of the things that, before I turn it over to Kurt, is I always have people think about the most dense forest they've ever walked in, and think about downtown Beaver Dam. That's what it looked like when the settlers first arrived.
Yeah.
And it was totally wooded, covered with a variety of Wisconsin native trees and buckthorn, and it was not an easy thing just to walk around this area where we're standing today.
And they were here primarily because the river was a big attraction.
The
I'm
river was a
assuming.
big attraction. Anytime somebody wanted to start a community, the first thing they thought about was pressure. And what I mean by that is water pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So if they could find a spot where they could build a dam, that's the first thing they look for. And damming up Beaver Dam, which would become Beaver Dam Lake, the Beaver Dam River, they dammed it up, and very, very near where the dam is located today, near the shoe factory apartments, and that created then Beaver Dam Lake, and that also provided a lot of water power. Of course, we had 3 dams in Beaver Dam at one time.
Wow, and those were rudimentary dams before the dam that we know now
Absolutely.
Put in place.
Wooden,
and
yeah.
Right, wooden,
old wooden dams.
yeah,
so.
and many times just stones and brush, anything they could find, and the whole community would have to help build the dams.
Yeah, and just for historical perspective, Beaver Dam is exactly how old?
Well, 1841, Thomas Mackey and his son-in-law walked from Fox Lake. Fox Lake was founded before Beaver Dam, and they walked on some pretty rudimentary trails, and they were Native American trails that led from Fox Lake to Beaver Dam, and through a lot of swampy areas, and as I mentioned, thicket, and it wasn't an easy job just getting from Fox Lake to Beaver Dam. It may have taken them an entire day to walk.
Yeah, you mentioned Thomas Mackey. We might as well plug another Historical Society event that's coming up tomorrow. I believe Mackey was the first person to be buried in the old city cemetery, which is where Haunted History is
Haunted
taking place
History
tomorrow.
takes place tomorrow evening, starting at 6 o'clock at the old cemetery, which is in North Beaver Dam, and so we're excited about that from 6 to 8 o'clock, and all people have to do is just show up, and you'll notice a table on Burnett Street where with just a $5 fee is all we ask, and we have some great interpreters at the museum who will be waiting to introduce you to some very interesting historical people from Beaver Dam.
Will you be one of those historical figures, Pat, this year?
I might be. I might be hiding behind one of the gravestones.
Very good.
All right.
So again, we are video streaming live today from the Dodge County Historical Society, the Rare Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County exhibit. If you check out the video stream, you'll be able to see a lot of the things we're talking about. We'll do our best to describe this stuff for our radio listeners as well, but we are going to start, as I understand, Kurt, in the earliest part of this exhibit, which this dates back 12,000 BC,
11
is
to
that what we're at?
12,000 years, and the initial part of this exhibit starts right here where we talk about the earliest physical evidence of people being in Dodge County, Wisconsin, and we call those people the Paleo-Indians, Paleolithic, Paleo-Indians. These are people that first come into Wisconsin somewhere between 12 to 11,300 years ago, or BC, I should say. And they, we actually know very little about these people because there is such an immense time gap between now and then. Things just did not preserve. But the things that did preserve that they left behind, things that they used in everyday life, such as stone tools, did. And what archaeologists do, like myself, is we study cultural, physical remains of things that people left behind, of people that may or may not have had a written language. And these people obviously had a language, but they didn't have a written language. But they left artifacts behind on the landscape that give us clues to not only what they were doing 11,000 years ago, but you know, where they were traveling around the county and into the early parts of Wisconsin. 11,000 years ago, Wisconsin was covered by an ancient glacier which covered up more than 3/4 of the state of Wisconsin. The southwest corner of the state, which we call the driftless area, because of the lack of glacial drift and till and sand and things that were brought down by the glacier, was an unglaciated area. So sometime, we don't know the exact time, But sometime between 11 and 12,000 years ago, people started to migrate into southwestern Wisconsin. And at that time, the glacial epoch that was occurring at that time, which coincidentally was called the Wisconsin glaciation, was starting to change. The climate was starting to change, and the glaciers were very, very slowly, over many thousands of years, starting to recede back to the north. So as they receded, Dodge County at different times during that time became exposed, the landscape did, and people were able to migrate into parts of Dodge County. And these people were highly nomadic hunter-gatherers that were following the migrational routes of not only extinct species of elk, but also mammoth and mastodon that were in this area as well. And we do have the Persian mammoth back here, which we can talk a little bit about as well. But so the earliest diagnostic artifact in North America is called a Clovis point, or a Clovis projectile point. This is a spear point, and they are very unique because they have these flutes. If you see this in the exhibit here, you can see on the base of that artifact, there's been a flute, or a piece of rock that has been flint-knapped off the base of that only occurs on the earliest known spear points in North America, which we call Clovis, which were first identified back in the 1940s and 50s in Clovis, New Mexico, where they actually found these type of ancient spear points in a direct association in archaeological context with buffalo remains that they had hunted and butchered.
So is that a groove that allows the staff to be attached
Exactly,
to it,
yeah.
essentially?
We believe that was a groove placed into the artifact base that allowed it to be hafted to the spear point. And there are different theories about how that may have also helped them to, when that projectile point would strike an animal, would also open up a wider bleeding path in the animal, which would help it to bleed out. Because you got to remember, in the Ice Age, the megafauna, as we call them, of the mammoth, mastodon, and the elk, and even some extinct species of bison, were much larger than any land animal that people were ever hunting. So you wanted to make sure that if you were going to try to stick a spear in something, that you were going to, wound it enough to, eventually take it down.
And how valuable were the tips? Was this something that was kind of a disposable item to them that they sat around and make all the time, or did they need to retrieve that once they used it?
Well, they tried to retrieve it,
Okay.
but that wasn't always the case. And luckily for us today, because they didn't retrieve it, these were found in plowed farm fields many thousands of years later, and tell us a history of where these spear points were found, not in the upper Midwest. Clovis culture, as we call it, the culture that produced these types of points, was pretty much nationwide. You see them on the eastern seaboard, you see them in the Midwest, you see them in the Southwest, parts of the South, of the Northwest part of the United States. So this was a cultural manifestation, if you will, that was widespread through North America at this time as the glacial epoch, receded and land became exposed to people for hunting and following those migration routes. They made these spear points out of many, many different types of stone material that they were exposed to during their hunting and gathering travels across the landscape. And some of these lithic materials were more suitable for making stone spear points than others. And part of our exhibit right here, we have a little bit about a very special stone material called Hixton silicified sandstone, which only comes from one place in Wisconsin, up by Black River Falls, by Hixton, Wisconsin. And this is an outcropping of sandstone that was actually formed 300 to 500 million years ago during the Cambrian period, when Wisconsin at that time was actually covered by an ancient sea. But when the glacial epoch was occurring during the Wisconsin glaciation, this rock outcropping was exposed by glacial action in the northwest corner of the Driftless area. So as Paleo-Indian people were coming into Wisconsin from the southwest, this was one of the first outcroppings of stone material that they came in contact with. So this stone material is literally sand that that was compacted with silica, which is what glass is made out of, and over many millions of years of pressure and heat and geological action, form these pockets of this silicified sandstone.
Wow.
And it comes in a variety of different shades. And there's a famous site called Silver Mound, which is a large geological formation that you see on the landscape. It's not a human-built mound, but a geological formation.
In Dodge County?
This is over by Black River Falls.
Oh, right, yes, of course.
In the northwest corner of the state. But the fact that we're finding Hickston silicified sandstone artifacts in Dodge County tells us a little bit about the movement of people in prehistoric times, and that in fact that they did have extensive trade networks and things. And this silicified sandstone, the way it's formed geologically is very different than what we would call chert, which is just another type of stone. There were about 24 types of chert in Wisconsin that formed in the geological record here naturally that ancient Native American peoples were procuring at different spots around the state to make spear points and other types of stone tools. But Hickston was special because this is a type of stone material that was used for nearly a 12,000-year period of use into many different types of spear points over time and other types of stone tools as well. So it was highly prized.
Well, let's talk about some of the
Sure.
these other bigger stones. Now, what were these Morris Egger collection larger stones used for?
Yeah, part of this collection came from the Morris Eggert collection. Morris Eggert was a gentleman who lived in Beaver Dam, born and raised here, lived here all of his life. He was 87 years old and recently passed away. And his siblings, Pam and Bob and Joan, who were generous enough to donate a fairly large portion of his prehistoric collection to us, also included some of these grooved stone tools. And what this part of the collection right here is in the exhibit is a little bit of an exhibit about a very rare type of fluted stone grooved axe head. Now, we have the flutes that occur on Clovis points,
Sure.
but we also had pecked grooved flutes that occurred on some of their other types of grown stone tools in the past.
Certainly.
And these grooved axes that have these flutes on them on the axe head of the artifact are very rare, for one thing, and they only seem to occur in the southern half of Wisconsin and a little bit into northern Illinois. So whether this was a particular group of people that were making these about 8,000 years ago
And trading them.
and trading them, but they tended to stay in a pretty tight geological area. So that's what makes them rare.
So they wouldn't be utilizing the Mississippi or the Rock or anything like that, or possibly.
No, they were using these. They were
using that.
absolutely using
But
these.
not to the full extent down south, it sounds like, not to the southern part of the
Well,
continent.
no, they had different types of grooved stone axes throughout prehistory, starting in the probably in the early Archaic, about 8,000 BC, and you find different types of grooved axes in other parts of the country. But this particular style of the fluted axe seems to be a Wisconsin manifestation that happened in prehistory.
And what's the date on this again?
These grooved axes, we believe, start to occur at the latter end of the early Archaic period, about 7,000 to 6,000 BC. So about 8,000 years ago.
And what were they used for, essentially?
Well, they were used for a number of different things, obviously to help them cut down trees. They were more than likely used as weapons as well. And the fluting that occurs on these, we're not really entirely sure why they put the flutes on the axe. It could have been purely aesthetic or for decorative purposes, or it might have had something to do with when they would use these possibly to split logs, that if you have that less surface area on the axe head, that it would go through splitting that log a little easier maybe. But they definitely rework some of these axes down. So, and you can see on some of them have little nicks and breaks in the backs where they were hammering on them. Well, that happened on the front as well. And they would sit and use different types of coarse sand and other abrasive materials to resharpen axes just like they did with projectile points as well. Most of these projectile points that you see in the case are actually reworked versions of much larger spear points that were reworked down to the point where they were almost expended, and then in some cases just discarded.
Were they recycled? Or they started big
Yeah.
and killed things and
Yeah,
then lost a little
exactly.
bit and then kept on whittling it down, essentially?
One way to think about the Clovis projectile point was that it was like the multi-tool of the early Paleo Indians. They use it as a knife, they use it as a spear point, they use it as a perforator. And then as they needed to resharpen it, then these projectile, like the two examples right here, you can see are much smaller than the showcase example from the Eggert collection. This is one that's more in its pristine size and hasn't been reduced by flint knapping.
Well, now we advance over here and we see maybe some of the more recreational items, the peace pipes, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. These ancient Native American people were really no different than you and I today in a lot of ways. They like to have fun. They like to smoke, and they like to play games. We have some examples of this is a very rare pipe bowl that actually came out of an effigy mound that was located one time in the city limits of Beaver Dam, where right near where Recheck's grocery store was at one time.
Where the Monarch Range facility was located.
Right. And that was owned, actually, coincidentally, by William Schneider, the guy that we talked about earlier, where a lot of the bulk of our collection from. His family his father owned a large farm in that area at one time that extended all the way up past where the Harley-Davidson plant is on the other side of the freeway up on the north side of town. And this pipe bowl was found in an effigy mound that dates to about 1,000 years ago. And what makes it interesting is it has some incised motifs on it. This pipe bowl is ceramic. It's made out of clay. And there were examples of these pipes that were also found in the Nitschke mound site out on County E by Burnett Township.
Sure.
And those mounds were excavated in the 1920s by a guy named Will McKern from the Milwaukee Public Museum, who found examples of the same pipe. This one was recovered by Will McKern and Wisconsin's first famous archaeologist, a guy named Charles Brown. We call him, and in the archaeological community, we call him Charles E. Brown. And Charles Brown came to Beaver Dam in 1905 to visit with Will Schneider. And at the time, Charles E. Brown was not only considered Wisconsin's first professional archaeologist, but he was also a founding father and the first curator of the State Historical Society of Wisconsin, and the founding father of the Wisconsin Archaeological Society, which I was a president of for several years. So this was collected by those two out of this mound, which was partially destroyed from plowing, unfortunately.
Which happened to a lot of mounds, I'm sure.
Which happened to a lot of mounds. In Dodge County, we had at least 160 documented mound sites, Native American burial sites.
And we know this because of Increase Lapham?
And we know this because of the famous Increase Lapham.
And we'll be talking about Increase Lapham in just a few minutes. The broadcast is live today from the Dodge County Historical Society. If you're listening to us on AM 1430 WBEV or listening over on dailydodge.com, check out the video tab at dailydodge.com. We are video streaming today's program. You can watch it live now or catch it after the program to see some of these things that we're talking about. Now, we do have to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to pick it up right where we left off here with the curator of the Dodge County Historical Society, Kurt Sampson, back in a few minutes.
Okay, good. Is it going all right?
Are we clear? All right.
Sorry about
This is
that, I forgot
fantastic. No, I mean, it didn't matter that much for gosh sake. But how's everything look? Are we recording this too?
We are not currently.
Okay.
The stream is beautiful. We've had no hiccups, nothing.
All right. Excellent. Good. Well, we should do this again sometime.
Here must be all the windows.
Right. I guess, yeah. I would have. He said he got excellent cell phone service in here, so.
Way better than I would expect coming from the backside looking at all the brick.
Looking at all the brick, right.
We just had it updated, actually. We were having problems with it for a while, then we had Spectrum come in, and so it's much better.
Oh, really? Okay. Spectrum came in.
They came in and fixed some stuff for us because it was not going well for a while.
Nice. So we'll probably, do we want to maybe, do we have some stuff to finish up over here?
We can. Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd like to talk about real quick here. Then we can go to the Mammoth if you like.
This
we
is the
talked
Mammoth,
about
right?
the Hickston a little bit.
Okay. So we'll probably finish this up, do this, take a break, and then go over here.
Okay.
All right. Does that sound good? What's that?
What's that?
He'll play that sweeper, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll play weather. You should have at least 10 seconds, if not 40. Okay. As a heads up. So it looks good, huh? Good.
Yeah, it looks amazing.
Great.
And the zooming in on stuff, like I can see the flutes on all the axe heads.
Nice.
I mean, real close.
Excellent. Excellent. We'll have to give you a copy of this for the archives for the Historical Society.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, we've been meaning to give you a hard drive of all of our tribute to veterans interviews with local veterans. It's something that we figure it's probably a good thing
That would
to
be
have
something we would
somewhere else.
definitely,
So
like
I
that.
mean, it's a flash drive isn't very big, so I mean it shouldn't be hard to find space for it. But I mean, it certainly is an interesting documentation of a lot of what our local veterans have talked about. We've been doing it for 10 years now, I want to say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we lost Bob Frankenstein because he was so
He was
on
amazing.
that, you know.
Yeah. He put that exhibit together, basically.
The entire upstairs, I haven't even touched it. I mean, it's just he
Perfect
just
the
did
way it is. So.
And he maintained it, and yeah.
Well,
I've added to it a little bit since he's passed away, but with some other donations and things. But yeah,
okay. All right.
yeah, he did a nice job with it, and
You guys busting at the seams though when it comes to stuff. I mean, don't you have?
we got more than we need to.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot to go through, I imagine.
Yeah, we're actually started a big project where we're going through all of our storage areas right
Really?
now and looking at things that were collected since really like the 1930s that should have never really been collected in the first place. And
What do you
things
get
that
rid of?
don't-
What do
yeah.
you keep?
And we're kind of being a little quiet about that because that makes people anxious that they think we're throwing things away, but we're not. And we're trying to find new homes for things in other historical societies.
Oh, okay.
And we've been successful doing that. But I mean, there are just things that were collected that.
Unnecessary.
Yeah,
Any
just-
gems?
Anyway.
And any gems that
Oh
were
yeah,
like, oh wow.
we're finding stuff in storage all the time that we didn't know that we had.
And
or
you're
that
just
we
like,
forgot.
oh my gosh.
A
look
lot
at
of this
this.
medical stuff that we're going to be putting out, we kind of didn't know the extent of it, and yeah, Patrick is going to be helping me work on that a little bit. And,
Interesting.
yeah, we thought that case over there would be a nice case for it, and we wanted to condense the Mammoth down, and so when you walk in and you see this first with this light lit up,
Oh
it's
yeah,
kind
cool.
of a
Right.
eye-catching thing. So
Yeah.
it draws you into this exhibit this way, So.
Seems like a little more age on the old beast since I've been in here last.
Yeah.
You're getting a new roof though.
We're getting a new roof, and we've been talking. We had our annual board meeting on Wednesday, and this was a topic of conversation with the. Once the roof is on it, we know that there's going to be no more water damage. We're going to redo this.
Oh, it's water damage, huh?
Steve Hankus, is on our board, who's a professional painter, and he's going to help us restore some.
How's this water damage? You got a floor above you.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
So wow, you're getting water damage from
Upstairs.
Upstairs.
That all came from the roof. That over by the bay window there came from
Yeah.
the upper part of the roof.
I could see that, sure,
Yeah.
especially skirting along the side of a building. But here in the middle, that's a little.
This
more
is
unexpected.
really
Age.
just, humidity and
Oh,
age.
Here we go. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. I needed to alert him.
You got to do your thing.
It is time for more of today's community comment. Here it is, your host, Greg Wormel.
And we are broadcasting live from the Dodge County Historical Society today, video streaming. Check out the video tab at dailydodge.com, and you can see firsthand some of the artifacts that we are talking about as part of the Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County exhibit. Dating back to 11,000, 12,000 BC. We covered that in the first segment of our program. And you'll be able to catch the podcast or video cast of this afterward if you would like to go back. We left off, where were we? About 6,000, 5,000, or 2,000 BC here, it looks like, for some of the more recreational tools.
Yeah. So in this latter half of the exhibit here, we're just showing some interesting artifacts that are fairly rare. Some of them are utilitarian type artifacts, like some different types of ancient pipes. This is a recent artifact donation that just came in from the city of Horicon, actually. This is a really interesting artifact because it's an ancient hoe. Oh. And what's interesting about it is that it is made out of Mill Creek chert, which only occurs in southern Illinois.
Oh, okay.
And this was found along the eastern side of the Horicon Marsh many years ago.
And that tells you essentially what?
Well, that tells us that not only were people farming in that area in prehistoric times, this was probably more likely associated with effigy mound builders that were here between about 600 AD to about 1100 AD. And we know from some archaeological excavations that occurred in the 1920s, specifically Nitschke mounds with Will McKern from the Milwaukee Public Museum, they were able to get radiocarbon dates from some of the organic materials from Nitschke mounds, and that dated that mound site to the tail end of the mound construction in Dodge County, which occurred from about 1000 AD to about 1150 AD. And that's at the same time that you have what we call Mississippian occupation of Wisconsin. The Mississippian culture is actually an intrusive culture that comes up from the American bottom, which is what we consider the lower Mississippi Valley down by the area around St. Louis, where there's a famous Mississippian city called Cahokia, which was actually North America's first ancient city.
Cahokia Mound's a very popular area.
Exactly.
They're not the only ones that came from southern Illinois to Dodge County. I made that similar trek many, many centuries later, obviously. But in your world, you're a lover of burial mounds.
Absolutely.
The Cahokia Mounds, is that a place you visited?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, when I was in graduate school, I did my dissertation on Astalon, which is Wisconsin's outpost of Cahokia.
Okay, all right.
And so this artifact more than likely made its way into Dodge County through trade with Mississippianized people that were at Astalon, which is just a few miles, about 40 minutes south of here. And Astalon State Park, which is where the Astalon site is today now, which you can visit as a state park, is an ancient village site that has 2 Mississippian platform mounds. And the Mississippian people only made their hoes out of 2 different types of things. They made it out of this Mill Creek chert, or they made it out of bison scapula, which were mounted on hafted sticks used to dig up the soil to plant corn. Now, the Mississippian people were the people that brought corn to Wisconsin for the first time, around 800 to 900 AD. So Astalon is really Wisconsin's first ancient farming village, or Wisconsin's first farming community. And as that corn horticulture spread through the region, so did the artifacts as well. And at the tail end of the mound construction of the effigy mound building, which dates from about 600 AD to about 1100 AD, many effigy mound building people in this area adopted corn horticulture, which they learned from the Mississippian people that were here. So this is an artifact that traveled a long way to get to Dodge County from southern Illinois, which makes it, of course, a rare artifact of Dodge County.
I'm familiar with that trek. We're broadcasting live from the Dodge County Historical Society. Open to the public right now. It's 1 to 4, your typical operating hours, right?
Wednesday through Saturday, 1 to 4. Yep.
So we're moving now to kind of the almost the centerpiece, one could say, of your exhibit here. I've seen this jawbone before, jawbone, for a
mammoth.
For a mammoth.
For a juvenile mammoth.
A baby.
Yeah.
What's the history of this? What do we know about it?
Well, there's not a lot known about this, but some of the mammoth bones that are in this case here were found by a gentleman named Steve Persha. And Steve Persha was a farmer from Mayville. He had a small acreage farm in Mayville. And Steve Persha lived well into his 80s. And the story is that he found this on a farm up north of Hustisford, near the northeast shores of Lake Sinisippi.
Oh, wow.
off of Strange Road, as a matter of fact. We actually know the road that where the farm is. And at the time, this was found on a farm that was called the Laufenberg Farm at the time. And Steve Persha had a side company where he would go around and dig ditches for people. And the story is that he was digging a ditch between two farm fields, tiling the field, and that he found these mammoth bones about 7 to 8 feet below the surface. And at the time he collected these bones, he didn't tell anybody that he found them. And he took them back to Mayville, and he put them in a display case, very similar to this, in his garage, and they stayed there for about 30 years.
Wow.
Until he passed away. And then when he passed away, Diane Persha and her sister Sandra were generous enough to donate these bones to us.
Did they know what they had?
Yeah, they did. They were not archaeologists, obviously, but they had a little bit of background information about what they were. And, of course, Mr. Persha himself was very proud of these. And I've actually gone out to the field in the area where these were found and talked to a couple of locals in that area and actually found the approximate location of where these were unearthed. And I've always wanted, being an archaeologist, I've always wanted to go back out there and maybe do a little excavating to see if we can find some more of this, because there's no doubt that there's more of this out there.
Yeah. What does that tell us about this area at that time, that this mammoth was there?
Well, it tells us that the climatic conditions in Dodge County were very different than what they are today. And it was a much, much colder environment. There were very little trees. It was very much like parts of Alaska today.
Wow.
And over many thousands of years, we're actually in a geological time period called the Holocene right now, which is an interglacial period, actually. So the glaciers are going to return to Dodge County in the future at some point.
At some point, centuries, if not
If
millennia down the
global
road.
warming doesn't do us in before
Right.
then, right? So, but yeah, this was a geological time period where the climatic conditions were much colder than they are today. Very severe winters. Vegetation was different. They had what was called a paleosol, which was actually, if you dig down in archaeological terms, you have an A horizon and a B horizon in soil stratigraphy. The A horizon is all of the material that's been built up over the last 10 to 12,000 years of organic black soil. When that bottoms out anywhere from about 50 to 75, 80 centimeters below the surface in Wisconsin, and you hit like a sandy type of soil that's kind of a yellowish loam, that is the actual land that was here 10 to 12,000 years ago.
Wow.
When these Paleo-Indian people were traversing around the state hunting mammoth and mastodon. There's actually some indication from looking at these bones that this was a butchered animal, whether it was killed by spear point or maybe scavenged by Paleo-Indian people. But the fact that the bones in some cases are like the jawbone, this is the lower left mandible, which is the centerpiece of the exhibit. You can see how it's broken in half on its right side there. That didn't occur because of plow scars or plow breakage. That to me looks like it has been bashed apart by a stone, by humans. And the fact that this was a juvenile mammoth that was, we think, around maybe 12, 13, 14 years old when it died, this smaller mammoth would have been a much easier target for Paleo-Indian hunters.
We are broadcasting live from the Dodge County Historical Society today, video streaming. Check out the video tab at dailydodge.com if you want to see some of the things that we are talking about on the program. We're here alongside the curator, Kurt Sampson. We also have the board of directors president, Pat Lutz, here with us. We do have some more aspects of prehistoric Dodge County that we want to cover, but we do have to take a break first. We'll be back here in just a few minutes on Community Comment.
All right.
And our guest is Kurt Sampson. He is the curator of the Dodge County Historical Society. That's where we're broadcasting live from, video streaming. Check out the video stream at dailydodge.com right now. And you can see some of the things that we're talking about. We've been going from 12,000 BC earlier in the program, moving up, and now we're in is it the woodland period?
The woodland period, yes.
So, and we see a lot of pottery, some replicas of what the pottery would have looked like, but a lot of fragments that were found right here in the Dodge County area.
Right here in Dodge County. Most of the pottery actually was found on the shores of Fox Lake.
Okay.
In the community of Fox Lake, just north of Beaver Dam. And the reproductions in the middle are actually made by a woman named Joan Slack, who is a master potter. And she took it upon herself to study ancient pottery shards, a lot of the ones that we have in the case here of different time periods. And she learned how the ancient people reproduced or made pots back then, and she reproduces these pots the exact same way ancient people used to reproduce them.
The same method.
Same
wow.
coiling method, same temper, same tools to make the different types of pottery decor and sizing and rope decor on there. And she actually open fires them in an open fire pit outside as well. So her examples of reproductions are not only in this museum, but in the State Historical Society Museum and in other local historical societies around the state, like the Horde Museum in Fort Atkinson as well.
What do these shards and fractured pieces tell us about the people at the time and what they were doing?
Well, what they primarily tell us at the time, most of the pottery that we have in the case here tells us that people at that time in the beginning of the early woodland period, which starts about 800 BC in Wisconsin, that people at that time were becoming more sedentary on the landscape. They were not maybe traveling around as much. They were becoming more territorial, and they were also starting to adopt more plants into their diet, and they needed cooking and storage vessels to cook and store different types of plants. So there are many different types of plants in Wisconsin that people throughout the woodland tradition, which dates from about 800 BC all the way up until about 1,000 years ago, were procuring around the state. Things like wild rice. Today, when you think of Fox Lake is still generally a fairly shallow lake, but in prehistoric times, it was even more shallow. And those types of shallow lakes in central Wisconsin, in the southeast part of Wisconsin, were good for large stands of wild rice. So people were definitely procuring that, and sumpweed and different types of sunflower, squash, beans, corn, which was brought up, like we mentioned before, from the Mississippians. And they needed storage vessels to store that stuff. So that's what that tells us basically about what people were doing back then. It also tells us that by that time, in the beginning of the early woodland, that the environment as we know it today had stabilized at that point. The modern environment that we know in Wisconsin today really begins to stabilize about 4,000 years ago. Okay. That's when we're really, by that point, what you see outside today is how the environment was. We had come out of that glacial period that we talked about before. Mm-hmm. There had been different species of trees and shrubbery that had, naturally migrated up this far from parts unknown, or south, I should say, and definitely even brought by animals as well. But by about 4,000 years ago, the modern environment begins to stabilize, and the types of foodstuffs that were available to ancient people were in full swing at that time.
Now, one of the key features of the exhibit, the rare prehistoric artifacts of Dodge County, is original book by Increase Lapham. Now, again, we are video streaming. You can see a lot of this stuff at the video stream at dailydodge.com. I don't know if the camera is going to get quite over there, but this book has got quite a bit of history to it.
It does, yeah. So I'll tell you just a little bit about Increase Lapham. Increase Lapham was a surveyor by trade, and he initially grew up in parts of Ohio and I believe in New York, and eventually He came to Ohio with his father, who was working on the canal projects in Ohio back in the early 1800s. And Lapham was also trained as a surveyor. And in 1836, Lapham comes to the city of Milwaukee on a steamboat through the Great Lakes chain. And he comes to Milwaukee to be employed by Byron Kilbourne in Kilbourne Town, when Milwaukee was literally in its infancy. And Lapham was hired to be the actual surveyor of the streets of Milwaukee, which he did for a number of years. And as Lapham was surveying, he was coming across ancient earthworks that were thousands of years old, effigy mounds, different types of middle woodland, ancient enclosures, embankments and things. And he was seeing these things literally destroyed by the plow right in front of his face. And being a scientist and a genius, he was really a genius, he got concerned about this. And as early as July of 1836, he published an article in what was called the Milwaukee Advertiser at the time, making a plea to the general public of the small hamlet of Milwaukee at that time, which was really no more than really a couple of dozen hamlets at the time.
Wow.
And he was making a plea to the influx of immigrants that were coming in and buying up land and putting the plow to the land to preserve the ancient earthworks that were in Wisconsin at the time. And of course, it kind of fell on deaf ears. People wanted the land for agriculture and for development. And to this day, unfortunately, there's only a couple of mounds that exist in the entire city of Milwaukee to this day.
Wow.
But jumping ahead, in 1850, Lapham goes to an organization that was called the American Antiquarian Society. Today, we know them as the Smithsonian Institution. And he goes to them and he says, if you give me $500, which was a lot of money back in those days, I will go around the southern third of Wisconsin and I will map as many mound sites as I can find along the landscape. So he sets off with his horse and a small buggy and his surveying equipment, and he goes from, first he starts in the Milwaukee area, then he makes it out to Waukesha, then he goes down to Racine, and eventually in 1851, he eventually makes it up to Dodge County.
Wow.
Now, you got to remember, Dodge County at that time was still a fairly remote area, and there were no paved roads at that time. There were trails, and there were ox cart roads and things like that, but there were no roads. And Lapham makes his way into the southern part of Dodge County, going through Hustisford first, up through Juneau, over to Beaver Dam, and then eventually over to Horicon and Mayville. And what he does is he maps a handful of mound sites that are in the county, and he later produces a book that was called The Antiquities of Wisconsin as Surveyed and Described. Now that's kind of one of those lengthy, wordy titles of books back then, but that's how they kind of worded a lot of titles of books back then. And what he did was he took 2 years of mound surveying around the state, including Dodge County, and he produced beautiful maps and gave this to the American Antiquarian Society, and this was actually the first book published by the Smithsonian in their Contributions to Knowledge series.
Wow.
And it was actually the first book published in Wisconsin on any topic of archaeological related topic in Wisconsin. And the book was published in 1855. And my friend Mark Olson actually owns an original 1855 original first print copy of the book that we have on display here that talks about Lapham's journey through Wisconsin. One of the interesting things about Lapham when he was here that I learned about him by reading his field notes that are on that are in the archives at the State Historical Society. Lapham actually didn't map as many mound sites in Dodge County as he could have, and the reason is that when he came here in the late summer and into early fall of 1851, we were having torrential rains then that they had never seen in documented written history in Dodge County. And he writes about this in his field notes about how the county was virtually impassable because of the torrential rains and that there were virtually no roads. So he didn't get around to as many places as he wanted to.
Now, these am I correct in some of these maps are actually what were transcribed by Increase Lapham of Dodge County mounds. So while we can't see the book, you'll have to come to the Dodge County Historical Society to see that first edition book. It's
very rare book. Only
very
150 of those books were printed initially.
Wow. But,
So,
but this is an example. Can you explain, while the camera maybe zooms in on this, what is a burial mound? What are these?
Well, burial mounds are ancient burials that were made by Native American people that lived here during the woodland tradition from about 800 BC up to about 1250 AD. And at different times, they produced different types of mounds. They first started off building large dome-shaped mounds that we call conical or conical type mounds. And then eventually, they do that for about 1,000 years from the early woodland up to the late woodland.
To celebrate the passing of an important member or a family member
Yes, exactly.
of society.
And they were also used as territorial markers. And people were going back to these mound sites where they designated a mound site over successive generations and burying people, important people we gather, because of the density of mounds in the county, we know that not everybody was being buried in mounds. So whoever was being buried in an effigy mound is simply a mound that dates from about 600 AD to about 1100 AD. That was an earthen mound that was shaped in the form of some type of an animal, a bird or a bear, and in some cases even mythological beings of their religious belief system, like thunderbirds and long-tail underwater panthers.
Were these thought to be their spirit animals
exactly,
or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was also probably the beginning of clan symbolism. Like the Ho-Chunk, for instance, have 12 clans in their
tribe.
Yeah, in their community. And these shapes of mounds were more than likely the beginnings of clan associations with those spirit animals. So what Lapham did was he went around and he was finding these sites all over the landscape, and he was getting tips from local people and where they were. And he set out to basically survey and map them. And what he did was, after he did that, he reduced that surveying information down and produced these beautiful template maps that look very much like this. This is an ancient mound site that once existed in Mayville that no longer exists. And that's why Lapham's work was so important, because many of the mound sites that Lapham mapped don't exist anymore. But because of his work in the mapping and surveying that he did in Dodge County, we know where those mound sites were, and we know the types of mounds that were in those areas at one time. So it's hugely important.
Again, this is some of the stuff that you could see at the Rare Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County exhibit at the Dodge County Historical Society. I believe we're going to end. Is this the earliest or most recent time period over here with this particular exhibit? If
where
the
we
camera
started,
could follow us.
Yep, where we started over here. In this case here, this is from the what we call the the Morris Eggert collection.
Who's Morris Eggert?
Morris Eggert was a gentleman that lived in Beaver Dam his entire life. He lived over on Lincoln Avenue, just about 4 blocks away from the museum over here.
Okay.
And I actually had the pleasure of meeting him a couple times before he passed away. He was 87 years old when he passed away recently, and I received a phone call from his children, Pam Wyden and Bob Eggert. And they asked me to come over to the house because they had something really neat to show me. Well, I went over there, and I found that Morris Eggert had one of the largest collection of prehistoric artifacts in Dodge County, and specifically artifacts that were known to have provenience of where they came from Dodge County. And over the course of about a month and a half, on Wednesday mornings before I would come into work, I was working with the family to go through this entire collection to identify the collection and sort out the artifacts by type and cultural time period. And as a result of that and my efforts, which was really several hours of work, Pam and her siblings were generous to donate a significant portion of the collection to the Dodge County Historical Society to supplement not only this rare artifacts exhibit that we're doing, but this will also stay on permanent display in our museum for the long run as well.
Wow, what do these artifacts tell us about Dodge County, the region, and its people?
Well, what's interesting about the artifacts in the Morris collection is that he was taking a record of where he was finding a lot of stuff in different townships. He wasn't just collecting in Beaver Dam. He was collecting artifacts out of virtually around every township in Dodge County. And what he would do is he would take a pencil, and he was writing the location on the face of a lot of these projectile points in the case of where he was finding this stuff. Sometimes it would say something like Trenton Township off County Highway G by Mud Lake, something like that. So what's interesting about this is that in his collection, he had Paleo-Indian artifacts, which are the earliest artifacts that we talked about, all the way up through the late woodland artifacts. And because he wrote the where he was finding a lot of this stuff down, it gives us an idea at different time periods where people were moving around and occupying different parts of Dodge County at different times in prehistory. And also what types of stone material that they were using, because in these cases there are probably at least 24 different types of stone material that the ancient people were using to make stone tools, and a lot of this stuff was not found in the geological record of Dodge County. So it also, like we mentioned before, it tells a little bit about how people were moving on the landscape, how they were procuring different types of materials in ancient times, where they were trading things from different times, and the density of different prehistoric groups during very specific types of time periods in Dodge County. So it's hugely important that if you're an avocational collector and you're walking farm fields around Dodge County and you're picking up ancient pottery and you're picking up stone tools that are being plowed up in farm fields, that you work with a professional archaeologist like myself to document where you're finding these materials. And that will help us to know where things were being found. And then these things are also added into the archaeological sites inventory at the State Historical Society level as well.
Now, how did Morris Egger come across these? Was he digging all the time, or was it
He
by
wasn't
happenstance?
digging. He might have been. I don't know if he was digging, but most of the time, avocational archaeologists, they simply just walk freshly plowed farm fields.
Wow.
And typically where they're more likely to find things are in farm fields that are closer to water sources. They're natural springs, or farm fields that are adjacent to the Rock River or other tributaries of the Rock River in Dodge County, the Horicon Marsh, Beaver Dam Lake, Fox Lake. So the people in ancient times, they were inhabiting areas where they were going to be able to find resources easy, right? So that's where you look. You look in farm fields that are adjacent to water sources and that have been plowed for at least the last 160 plus years in Dodge County. And over in the spring and the fall, after they turn the soil up or turn it over or dig it up again in the spring to plant, the plows today actually don't go quite as deep as plows did many years ago. But the soil is continuously being turned over. So things are continuously being turned over that are prehistoric, that were left on the landscape many thousands of years ago. And what will happen is when you walk a farm field after it's been plowed and there's no vegetation on it, you simply just look down and you'll start to see maybe clusters of artifacts and of stone material in a corner of a field maybe. And so if you look down and you find an arrowhead, you look around the area that you're looking, and you'll start to see that there are other perhaps remnants of stone tools in a tight cluster in a spot. And that's how we as archaeologists even determine where there are habitation sites, ancient habitation sites. Maybe it was a small encampment where some guys 10,000 years ago just decided to stop for the night, and then they were refashioning their tools from flint knapping. Or maybe it was a site that was a continuous habitation site for many, many generations, where you have a much denser collection of things in a field. So that's what they were doing. That's what collectors do. They basically walk the fields, they find the artifacts, and they just pick them up.
And you could see these both under the video tab at dailydodge.com, or you can come to the Dodge County Historical Society while the Rare Artifacts of Prehistory of Dodge County exhibit is going on. How long is this exhibit going to be
It's going to be up for at least a year.
Okay, so what are the hours here at the Dodge County Historical Society?
We're open Wednesday through Saturday to the public from 1 to 4. Or by special appointment in some occasions for group tours and things like that.
And for those listeners or viewers who may just be joining us, give us a quick general recap of what it is they're going to see in this exhibit.
So if you come into the Dodge County Historical Society, the first thing you're going to see is our newest exhibit, which is entitled Rare Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County. And these are some of the rarest types of artifacts that you'll find not only in our museum, but also from other museums around the county, like the Satterley Clark House, which is the Historical Society in Horicon, the old train depot up in Fox Lake. And these are artifacts that span an entire 12,000-year history of prehistoric occupation of Dodge County, Wisconsin.
Wow. And it is alongside other exhibits that you've got here at the Dodge County Historical Society. I think we lost Pat Lutz, but if you could just generally mention some of the other exhibits that folks will be able to tour when they're here.
Well, when you come into the museum, we have exhibits that primarily talk about the history of Dodge County and specifically the city of Beaver Dam. Many of the exhibits we have talk about the earliest pioneers of the city area, famous people like Fred McMurray and Mary Spellman, Beaver Dam's first female mayor, and a mayor that was actually one of the first female mayors in the entire country. We have a wonderful veterans exhibit on the second floor, which was primarily put together by former board member Bob Frankenstein. The basement is entirely industrial history of Beaver Dam, Monarch Corporation, and other types of businesses that were here at one time. We have the very popular one-room schoolhouse, which is upstairs, which is very popular with our grade school age kids, and many more stuff. Lots more stuff.
And another plug for the Historical Society, you do have your haunted history at the Beaver Dam City Cemetery, the oldest burial ground, well, modern burial ground. I think maybe
European
I
burial
earlier.
ground. Yeah.
European burial ground in Dodge County. And that's when again?
That's tomorrow night from 6 to 8 in the Old City Cemetery. This is on the corner of East University and Burnett, right across the street from the Casey Jones gas station right there. And we will have 9, I believe, historical reenactors. I'm going to be Hasseltine Dunton.
Oh, who's Hasseltine Dunton?
Hasseltine Dunton was a young man who grew up in Beaver Dam that enlisted in the Civil War and was part of the 14th Regiment of the Wisconsin Regulars, who unfortunately was killed in battle at the Battle of Tupelo in Mississippi in 1864. And I will be portraying him and talking about his life and his history as a Civil War soldier.
All right. Once again, that is the Haunted History program at the Old Beaver Dam City Cemetery. In the meantime, the Rare Prehistoric Artifacts of Dodge County exhibit is on display right now, Wednesdays through Sundays. Saturdays, 1 to 4 p.m. Are you going to be doing anything for Christmas this year like you had in years past during the
Yes, we'll
parade?
have our annual Christmas open house to the public will be from 1 to about 7 o'clock on December 7th, which is the first Saturday in December when we have the Beaver Dam Community Christmas Parade. Last year it got rained out. Hopefully this year it's not going to get rained out. But come on down. You can see the exhibit then as well, and we'll have a lot of refreshments and cookies and treats like we always have, and hot chocolate. And I don't know if the I haven't heard if the parade's going to go by the building like it used to this year.
I didn't hear anything about a change. Maybe there will be. We haven't had them on community comment yet, the parade
Yeah,
organizers.
but,
We'll have to
if
see.
you
There's
do
been
have
talk
them
of that,
on,
huh?
tell them they need to go by our building because we're a lot of people like to use our lawn for that. So.
It's a neat old building too, 129 years old.
Exactly, yeah.
And certainly housing all of the history of the community here in Beaver Dam. The website for folks that want to check you guys out online.
Dodge County Historical Society, 1938.
Wow. Okay.
That's our founding year.
Your founding is okay. That's the Dodge County Historical Society 1938.com.
Yeah.
Very good. Kurt Sampson here is the curator of the Dodge County Historical Society. Want to thank him for walking us through the prehistory exhibit that is on display right now at the Dodge County Historical Society. Want to thank Pat Lutz for joining us earlier, the president of the Dodge County Historical Society Board of Directors. And again, remind our listeners, feel free to check out the video stream. It's going to be podcasted under the video tab at dailydodge.com, or come down to the Dodge County Historical Society Museum and see this for yourself in person. Kurt, thanks again for joining us today, and thanks for having us out here. Thanks for having me out here at the Dodge County Historical Society. That's going to do it for today's community comment.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
That's great.